Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us. My name's John Kennedy. I'm the co-founder, or one of the co-founders of Amity, and it's my pleasure to welcome you here for another edition of our popular webinar series. Before we get started, I just want to change your, there. Just a couple notes before we begin. We encourage you to join the conversation on social media. So on Twitter, you can use the hashtag CS Webinar, as well as the Get Amity and WnTD partners. Their handle is @partnersWnTD. And after our presentation, after Elizabeth's presentation today, there will be time for Q&A. So we encourage you to hang around for that. Before we begin, I just wanted to let everyone know that these webinars are sponsored by Amity. So Amity, we make a flexible customer success software for customer success teams. It's made by friendly Canadians like myself. We are, we focus on increasing user adoption. We'll help you and your team retain more customers and grow client revenue. And it's a flexible platform. Sort of, we're not locked into, or Amity doesn't lock you into sort of a cookie cutter approach. Every SaaS business is different and your business models change over time. And so Amity provides a lot of flexibility to customize and to configure and to support the growth that's going to happen as you have more customers and more revenue from existing customers. And by all means, you can check out our reviews on G2 Crowd to see what our happy customers are saying about us. So without further ado, we're in for a treat here. Some of you may know that up here in Toronto, we have a very large customer success community, and we run monthly meetups. We've been doing it since 2013. And a few months back, Elizabeth from WnTD Partners did a presentation about perfecting the sales to CS Handoff and Kickoff, and it was a great presentation, really widely received, tons of great feedback. And so we thought, hey, let's not keep her a secret up here in Toronto. Let's get her out there and speaking to our broad community of customer success pros. So without further ado, I'll pass it over to you, Elizabeth.
Hi, everyone, and thanks for the introduction, John. I'm super happy to be here and very excited to be talking about perfecting the sales to customer success. So what we're going to cover today are the strategies and tactics around the sales to customer success handoff. But we're also going to cover why it's important and the business impact perfecting the sales to CS handoff has on your overall organization. We're going to talk about how to get buy-in from the sales team and the rest of your organization as well. Then we're going to dive into the 5-step systematic process. And then we're going to talk about running effective kickoff calls and getting onboarding started on the right foot. Now, we're going to cover a lot of material today. At the end of the webinar, I'm going to provide links to downloading our Sales to CS Handoff cheat sheet and guide. And I'm also going to provide a kickoff call template. So the work that goes into creating this Sales to CS Handoff, it's one of those things that does require a lot of work up front, but from my experience, it is worth it. It saves you, your team, and your customers time in the long run. So let's dive in. So the analogy that I like to use is looking at the intersection of sales and customer success. The handoff is one of the most, if not the most important intersections of the entire customer journey. And the analogy I give to my clients that I work with is this. You're at the intersection and you have the choice to go down 3 paths. You can take a left to Churnsville, and what that is and how that happens is when you have a sales to CS handoff that is incomplete or doesn't exist. Your customers sign on, they become your customer, but they don't know who to go to. they don't get onboarded, and they become inactive and eventually churn. Or they can take a right into mediocre meadow. So perhaps they start to self-onboard, or they take it upon themselves to find out who they go to for help. So they start off with an incomplete experience and a frustrating experience, and they become detractors and perhaps churn eventually, or most likely churn eventually. Or you can create a sound process between the sales and the customer success teams and provide them with a path to get to successful product adoption. This guides them down to retention road. And so we're going to talk about today how to get there and what are the steps that each team needs to take in order to make sure that we're providing and guiding our customers to successful product adoption and retention. So why perfecting the sales to CS handoff is important? So according to a recent report by Deloitte, customer-centric companies are 60% more profitable compared to companies that are not focused on the customer. So by creating a scenario and a situation and a framework and a customer journey for your customers, we're at the point of going from the sales journey to the post-sales journey. You're going to provide them with an appropriate onboarding experience, which is going to lead to successful product adoption, provide customer satisfaction and loyalty to your organization, which will ultimately result in increased retention and revenue. Not having a sound process in place also brings about missed opportunities and risk. And what those missed opportunities and risks are missed growth and expansion sales and missed referrals and advocacy. When customers get started out on the wrong foot or don't get started at all in some cases, what happens is that they will leave and not only take their renewal money with them, but they will take money that they would have spent on increased users, upsell and cross-sell, and expansion into other areas of their business. They'll also take acts of advocacy such as case studies, testimonials, referrals. It's literally money walking out your door. Okay, so now that we've talked about how important it is and why it's important, let's talk about getting buy-in. So in order to really perfect the sales to CS handoff, it is one of those strategies and tactics that do run best if you have buy-in from your sales team and your organization as a whole. So getting buy-in, let's start with the sales reps. So when there isn't a sales to CS handoff, when there isn't an introduction and a clear point of contact post-sale, what often happens is that customers will go back to their sales rep that they purchased from when they need assistance. This distracts them from their current sales cycle and takes time away from closing new business. So when you start looking at the time and talking to your sales counterparts about the time that sales reps end up having to put into their post-sale customers, it can really add up and it makes a big impact. It also saves customers and CSMs time in the long run. For customers, they don't have to spend time trying to figure out who they go to for help. And then for CSMs, it saves them time from having to smooth things over with frustrated customers and maybe fix things that went wrong when customers started to self-onboard when they didn't know who to go to for help. You can also explore how it helps others achieve their targets in your organization. So this is a big part about getting buy-in on the sales to CS handoff across your organization. So for example, perhaps your sales team is responsible for expansion sales, or maybe they have a 90-day churn clawback. If you look at what your sales counterparts are targeted on, they will then start to realize and start to see as you walk through the process how putting this process in place will have a material impact for the better on their numbers and their targets. You can also share the impact with your broader company on metrics such as lifetime value and the cost to serve. So when customers don't get off on the right foot with onboarding, when they don't know who to go to for help, the odds of churn skyrocket. Most churn really does happen in the first 90 days. Even if you have an annual contract, your churn can be attributed to a bad experience in the first 90 days. And especially with SaaS companies, where a lot of the revenue comes into play is when you're in your year 2, year 3. So when you look at the impact of the sales to CS handoff and a poor onboarding experience and losing that customer in the first year, then what you're really going to see is a dramatic decrease in that lifetime value. It also increases the cost to serve, because what happens is when they start getting off on a bad foot, when they don't onboard properly, then you have to spend more time as a CSM and likely in your support organization as well, trying to get things back on the right track. So when you start looking at the compounding effect that this has on the overall organization, the numbers really start to add up. It's well known that acts of advocacy are extremely valuable to customers or to companies. When you think of referrals and testimonials and case studies and what those represent to your organization, when you have a sound sales to CS handoff process in place, it makes getting these acts of advocacy much easier. Other things that you can look at are onboarding churn and customer feedback. So you can look at, if you're in a month-to-month contract with your customers, who churns in the first 90 days and how that is attributed to a poor sales to CS handoff experience. You can also look at customer feedback in the first 90 days. And if your customers are on annual contracts, you can look at churn feedback if you do exit interviews, and I recommend that you do that with churn customers, and see and quantify how much of that churn was attributed to not getting started right in the first place and a poor onboarding experience. Lastly, you can investigate volume of onboarding support tickets that could have been avoided if a sound sales to CS handoff was put in place. So there's a number of strategies and tactics here that you can use, and it does take a little bit of legwork, but if you're making a case to your organization, there will be some pretty dramatic impacts and numbers that will jump out to your sales team and your organization as a whole. So let's dive into the 5 systematic step process of the sales to CS handoff. So in the 5 steps, there's strategies that you can implement over the long run, and there's tactics that you can literally put in place tomorrow. So we're going to start with talking about mapping what your current process is. Then we're going to talk about establishing an appropriate customer engagement framework. And once that's established, determining the responsibility and accountability of all of the tasks and all of the responsibilities in your framework. Then lastly, we'll talk about the internal and external communication process. So mapping the current process. I look at this as 4 core plotting points. Now what I want you to keep in mind is when you're doing this, this step is what your current process actually is. Not what you hope it to be, but what it is. You want to identify what the common paths are and what the common process that your customers are facing. Even if you don't have a formal customer journey in place, your customers are going through some sort of journey. So map out what that is. Start by looking at your sign up. So how do customers sign up with your organization and become a customer? Do they go through a lengthy sales cycle? Do they sign up through your website with a credit card, or maybe it's something in between? Then from there, look at your onboarding options. Are there options to purchase professional services? Is there webinars? Is it self-serve? Then look at what your first point of contact is, or what your customer's first point of contact is. Now again, this is one of those things that you're looking at what is actually happening and not what you're hoping is happening. So for instance, you hope that your customers are in contact with your customer success managers as their first point of contact. But if there isn't a sales to CS handoff in place, they're likely going back to their sales rep, or maybe they're reaching out to support or even social media. Map out what all of those common first points of contact are. Then look at how customers actually get started. Now, this is a little bit different than the onboarding options, because even though you have a number of different onboarding options in place, how your customers are actually getting started could be a completely different thing. So look at what those common paths are and see what the delta is. Look at the difference of what the onboarding options are that you have in place versus what your customers are actually experiencing. From there, determine the appropriate customer engagement framework. Now, I'm not going to go through this checklist verbatim. I'm going to break this down into 3 themes, but this checklist is one of the pieces that are that's going to be available in the download that's provided at the end of the webinar. So the 3 themes, the first one is the customer segmentation. So you want to look at what your customer segments are and what are the appropriate engagement types and customer journey for each segment. If you don't have customer segmentations at place in your organization, hopefully you do, but this is something that you can do as a CSM with your assigned portfolio or as a CS leader. Some tips of looking at this are, look at what commonalities your customer base has. Is there common industries? Are there common needs, use cases? What are the priority levels of your customers? So for example, do you have a makeup of perfect target market fit and others that are a bad fit? Look at what your customer segmentation is, and I recommend coming up with 2 to 3 segments. Any more than that and you're going to start having a hard time managing it and it's not scalable. And then from there, look at what your content and customer education is. So what onboarding and educational content exists today, and what do you need to create? So for example, do you have email templates with resources to supply to your customers upon sign up? Think about the questions that your customers typically ask in the first 30 days with your organization while they're onboarding. Do you have content to serve up to your customers when and where they need it? If not, do an audit and see what exists and what doesn't, and determine what you need to create for each of the customer segments that you just laid out. Then look at automation. What technology capabilities do you have that you can leverage to share onboarding and customer education content? So perhaps you have the ability to do email journeys. Do you have videos that you can share with your customers, and videos that have clear learning objections that guide to product adoption? In-app tutorials. How can you leverage the automation that you have today and the technology that you have today to facilitate the customer segments in your customer journey? So here's a customer engagement example. So what this looks like is when you take a 3-pronged approach to your customer segmentation. You might have some customers that have a high one-to-one frequency need, a lot of one-to-one communication with your customers, then others that are in a lower one-to-one frequency. They do get a dedicated CSM, but their appropriate customer journey isn't as high frequency and a high touch need as the first segmentation. And then you might have some that are self-serve and highly automated. What I want you to take away from this slide is the fact that the framework is the same. The sales completed through to kickoff onboarding. How you execute on it with each different type of customer segmentation differs, but at the end of all 3 of these, you're looking at first time to value. So to recap, when looking and determining what your desired and what your ideal customer engagement framework should be, you're looking at what your customer segmentations are and what their needs are. Looking at what content and educational information that they need and how you can automate some of that and augment their existing communication with their CSM. And all of that, regardless of the customer segmentation, is getting to first time to value. So diving into one of the examples a little bit further, again, you can see here at the very first line, you're going to go through all of the steps of the process of what's appropriate for the customer segmentation that require a high one-to-one frequency in their contact with their CSM. From there, you might put an automated onboarding journey in place, because in between those conversations with your CSM, maybe the appropriate thing for your customers and the appropriate customer experience is giving your customers some information and educational content when and where they need it, so they can continue along their journey and their learning in between each conversation with their CSM. And then from there, you start looking at what their training sessions will look like, what their onboarding process is, and again, finally getting to that first time to value. So this is just one example of what a framework could look like at the end of going through those exercises of creating the segmentation and the desired framework. So once you've gone through all of those steps, look at determining responsibility and accountability. I can't stress the importance of this step enough. If you fail to determine who's responsible and accountable for each part of the journey, it could render the rest of the previous steps that you took ineffective. So I'm a big fan of the RACI model. For anybody who's not familiar with the RACI model, it's been a framework that's been used by project managers for years, and it stands for responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed. And it's a framework that allows you, with any of your projects, to take into account all of the tasks, all of the action items, and assign who's responsible and accountable for each one. Because you don't want to end up in a situation, in the scenario, where you have all these tasks, you have this wonderful customer engagement framework, but people are unclear and there's not clarity around who's responsible for which item, and a ball gets dropped. So I highly recommend going through this step and outlining who exactly is responsible for what item. This RACI model, this infographic, is also going to be part of the Sales to CS guide that will be available for download. So I know it's a little hard to read here, but you'll be able to get that at the end of the webinar as well. So the final two steps: create a consistent internal and external communication process. So the internal communication process is really important because it really informs what is going to, what the external communication process is really going to be like for the customer. So for example, if you're going to have a high frequency one-to-one communication process, and that's going to be the engagement framework for part of your customer base or all of your customer base, you may want to do something like an internal kickoff call between your sales rep and your CSM. Then your CSM can get all the information firsthand from the sales executive, and then their first point of contact is providing value to the customer and teaching them what they already know, the CSM explaining to them what they already know, and diving into the conversation more deeply than getting the customer to have to repeat themselves. So first step is you want to add information into specified fields into your CRM. Regardless of what the framework is, whether it's one-to-one or automated, you want to have some mode of communication for all of the information that's collected during the sales process to go into your CRM or your customer success platform, so your CS team and your CSM can access that information. You also want to create a consistent process for assigning CSMs. So whether it's round robin or assigning CSMs by industry, whatever the case may be and whatever is most appropriate for your customer base, you want a consistent and timely process so CSMs are assigned immediately upon the close of the sale. Lastly, you want to establish an internal method of communication. So this alerts the CS team of incoming handovers from the sales team. This can be done through automated notifications in your CRM, internal meetings, Slack notifications, emails. Look at how you typically communicate in your organization and figure out a framework for establishing that internal communication that's best for your organization. So lastly, external communication. I'm going to start with the golden rule of one. And if there is one thing that you take away from this webinar today, this would be one of the most important pieces to take away. You want to make sure that the handover happens within 1 business day. So if your framework, again, is a one-to-one communication and you're getting a direct handover from a sales executive to a customer success manager, that email needs to go out within 1 business day. If your customers are self-serve and it's mainly automated, you want to make sure that that welcome email with all of the onboarding resources go out within 1 business day. The reason being is because customers have competing priorities and they may get distracted. So you want to capitalize on that momentum and excitement that typically comes along with the close of a sale. You also want to make sure that customers don't self-onboard, because what can often happen is that they may make mistakes in their onboarding, and then it results in a frustrating customer experience and more time from your CS team and maybe even your support team because they've had to go back and help them undo mistakes that they've made. So I mentioned an email introduction to customers. So that's the first step of the internal communication process. So as I mentioned, whether it's a one-to-one introduction directly from a sales executive to a CSM or an automated process coming from your customer success team, make sure that that happens within 1 business day. You'll also want to make sure that you're providing handoff documentation. So what is the onboarding content and resources that'll be helpful to your customers? What are the pieces of information that will help them and guide them to the best possible customer experience that will get them to successful product adoption and first time to value? So for example, do you have a quick start guide that gives them step-by-step instructions and links to resources? Do you have links and resources to support and how to create tickets so your customers can easily navigate that? Think of all of the items and all of the resources that your customers are going to need and provide that to them in the handoff email or documentation or their welcome email. Third, inform customers of the onboarding process. So if they have a kickoff call or intro call and they have a one-to-one communication customer engagement framework, then let them know. Don't make them guess. Don't let them kind of wonder, okay, what now that I've signed on, what happens next? Be clear and provide a path for them. If they are part of an automation journey, let them know if there's webinars, let them know if there's videos, whatever the content is that you have to provide to them, provide it again within that 1 business day and give them the information that they need in order to get onboarded and get to time to value as quickly as possible. So what about self-serve customers? So I've mentioned automation and self-serve customers a couple of times, but let's look at them a little bit more closely. One of the aspects of the self-serve customer playbook, if you will, is that a lot of these tactics and a lot of these tools can be used to augment and improve the customer journey of all of your customer base. So whether they're a one-to-one customer journey framework, whether it's lower frequency, as I had in one of the previous slides, by providing and looking at what technology and what automation you have in place, you can improve the customer journey for all of your customers. So for example, in between your kickoff call and a training session with your customers, you can send them automated content, so videos, how-to guides, best practices, regardless of what framework they fit in. So for your self-serve customers, what you'll want to do is you'll want to provide an easy-to-follow onboarding path upon sign-up. From there, you're going to want to look at, okay, what is the email journey that I can provide to my customer that's going to get them to first time to value? So do you have the capability of giving them an onboarding path based on their activity in the product? If not, can you use and leverage your email tools, your email automation, to send them an onboarding journey within a certain time frame? So maybe you'll send out emails on day 1, 3, 5, 7, whatever is most appropriate for your customer base. Consider also sending plain text emails. So what I mean by this is looking at the difference between HTML emails, so that's typically what you would get from marketing, versus plain text emails, which is what we send every day from our inbox. The reason being is because there has been some studies and some stats that show that plain text emails do have an open rate that's a bit higher than HTML emails, because the HTML emails, they get confused for marketing emails. And not that those aren't valuable, but the idea is that you want to make it very clear to your customers that this is onboarding content, this is part of their onboarding journey, and this is very distinct and different from your marketing emails. So just something to think about and how you're delivering the content to your customers. Look at things like in-app messaging, contextual guides, and digital adoption platforms. So what are the tools that you can leverage and use to provide customers with onboarding information when and where they need it? I'd also consider and suggest creating a CS team email queue for your customers. So even for customers that are self-serve and highly automated, you don't want to make it impossible for your customers to reach out to a human being when they need help. So if somebody responds to a welcome email, have that go to a CS team email queue that is managed by your CS team and that can help customers, because oftentimes they might just need a link to an email or a link to a video to help them kind of move on to the next step. So all of these things can be leveraged for your self-serve customers, but they can also be leveraged for the rest of your customer base as well. So strategies and tactics for CS leaders. So I want to talk about how CS leaders can enable their team in this process. So we talked about collaborating and getting buy-in from your sales team members and your organization as a whole. To perfect this process, it is really important to collaborate with your sales leaders. So go back to the buy-in tactics and tips that I provided below and work with them on perfecting this process and work with them to go to the organization for any resources that you may need, such as maybe the automation tools, some of those tips and tricks that I shared with you. You want to establish a repeatable process for assigning CSMs. So this is a really important piece of this whole process. So going back to the golden rule of 1 and making sure that customers get introduced to their CSM within 1 business day, a big part of this is going to be able to assign the CSMs appropriately. So look at what's appropriate for your customer base. So do you do it by vertical? Do you do it by geography, use cases, customer needs? Maybe it's round robin. Whatever the case is and whatever is best for your customer base, make sure that you have a repeatable, efficient process. You'll also want to create deadlines and set up a methodology for tracking handovers. So you'll want to ensure that the timelines are followed and that there isn't a breach of the 1 business day and all of the steps that you've put in place. Because it could be that a CSM may be overloaded. Maybe they've had 5 introductions, they've had 5 sales to CS handoffs within 1 week. And it's kind of getting to the point where they're not able to keep up. So you'll want to make sure that you're on top of that and can step in and reallocate resources where necessary. Establish escalation processes as well. So this is another area where you'll want to work with your sales counterpart. For escalations that occur, look at things like if there is a customer complaint because of an issue that they had during the sales process, then that escalation path should go to the sales manager. If a customer is upset because of something that happened post-introduction, during the kickoff call, whatever the case may be, that should go to an escalation point to the CS leader. Make these steps really clear so that when there is an issue, because they inevitably do occur, that your team knows exactly who to escalate to and who to go to. You'll also want to measure impact. So a couple of ways that you can do this is track onboarding churn and conduct customer surveys. So tracking onboarding churn is quite easy if you're on month-to-month contract, because you can see who churned within the first 90 days and who never got onboarded into that first time to value. For customers that are on an annual contract, you can still look at some of these metrics, such as who didn't get onboarded, who never got to first time to value, didn't adopt the product, and ended up churning because of their experience in their first 90 days. With conducting surveys, what I found effective in the past is surveying customers who went through the sales to CS handoff before introducing this process, and those that went through and then surveyed those that went through the new and improved process, and see what the delta is. Create a survey that you can quantify, and then you'll be able to see how much you're improving and if there's still room for improvement as you continue through evolving your customer journey. Lastly, I want to talk about high tech versus low tech. So what I mean by this is that you may have in place a CRM and a customer success software platform where you can create all of these notifications, automated emails. You can create reporting so that you get a list of sales that have closed each day, which enables you to scale over time. But on the other hand, if you're at the stage of a company where you haven't evolved to the point where you have the CRM and the customer success software and all of this automation in place, this framework is still possible. In previous startups that I worked at that were very early stage and bootstrap startups, what we did was we literally used whiteboards and Excel spreadsheets. Now that doesn't scale as your customer base grows over time, so you do need to evolve as your company grows and as your customer base grows. But the point that I want to make is that you don't need to have all of the bells and whistles of the technology in order to put this framework in place. Keep in mind, as you grow, you will have to evolve, but you can use low-tech technology such as whiteboards and Excel spreadsheets, like I mentioned, and then evolve over time into using CRMs, automated notifications, and into customer success software programs like Amity. So, what if there isn't buy-in from sales? Because unfortunately, this can be the case. There are things that you can do to improve this process and improve the customer experience if you don't have buy-in from sales. And things that you can do and put in place tomorrow while you're working on getting buy-in from sales and the rest of your organization. So here are some tips and tricks that I've used in my time as a CSM and a CS leader. So CS managers can monitor when sales are closed. So even if you're not getting that internal communication via an internal kickoff call or notifications, get a report, talk to your sales manager, and find out how you can get access to sales that are closed on a daily basis. Monitor that, and when sales are closed, assign a CSM. So as I mentioned before, creating a process that's efficient and timely, you'll want to do that whether you have the sales to CS handoff directly from your sales team member or not. Have the CSM proactively reach out and introduce themselves as a new point of contact. So once you have that sales closed, you know that you have the CSM assigned, then your CSM can proactively reach out and introduce themselves. So they can say, hi, I see that you've joined, welcome, create an email that's representative of your brand, and make sure that you get to that customer within that one business day if at all possible. And make sure that your CSM is proactively reaching out. Create and execute an engagement framework from this point forward. So all of those steps that we talked about, looking at your customer segmentation, looking at the customer content and educational content that you have and need to provide to your customers, and then automating what you can. Create what that framework is that's going to get your customers to that first time to value, whether their appropriate customer experience is that one-to-one framework or an automated, and execute that from this point forward. Create email templates and kickoff call decks as well. This will provide efficiency and consistency. And you can also continue to provide educational content and onboarding information, whether there's buy-in from sales or not. Lastly, follow kickoff call best practices and do research on the customers. So if your sales team does take call notes, read through those if possible. Do research on the new customer that you have and get as much knowledge as you can going into the call. which leads us into the final topic of the webinar, which is running an effective kickoff call. So we're going to talk about the elements of an effective kickoff call and some of the work that you can do leading up to the kickoff call, and then how to execute during the kickoff call. So first off, you'll want to ensure all key stakeholders are involved in the kickoff call. So if you can get all of the decision makers, the end users, everyone that was involved in the decision-making process on the kickoff call, that is ideal. Because it's a great opportunity for you to learn more about them and them to learn more about you and get on the same page as far as onboarding and all of the parts and pieces that go along with getting onboarded and to first time to value. It's not realistic that all decision makers will be on every single training session, but if you can get them on the kickoff call, that is ideal. Then you'll want to create an agenda and share it prior to the call. This is really important because it puts everybody and sets the stage and the tone for the kickoff call and gets everyone on the same page. It also helps establish professionalism, and it helps instill trust from your customers because they see that you're organized and you're prepared and that you're ready to help them through their customer journey and their onboarding. You also want to prepare a kickoff call deck that fosters collaboration and facilitates a conversation. Having a kickoff call deck doesn't mean reading off of a series of slides or making the call about the deck itself. It's a way to facilitate the conversation and keep everyone on track and focused during the call. So again, you don't want the kickoff call deck to be the call and be the topic. You want it to facilitate. Also, be the leader of the call. This is not to say to dominate the call and to not have collaboration, but guide the customer down a path that you know will get them to successful product adoption and to first time to value. Remember that you're the expert and you're there to help and teach them. So be the leader of the call, and as I said, guide them down the appropriate path. Also use it as a medium to share information and teach. In a couple of slides, I'm going to give you an example of a slide from one of the decks that I typically use. That will also be included in the download that will be available at the end of the webinar. But this is a really, really great way to start teaching your customers and setting that tone for being that trusted advisor as a CSM. So how to run an effective kickoff call. Introductions. Don't take this step for granted. Something that I often see happen, and to be quite honest, as my time as a CSM, something that I did myself, was I would list off everyone on the call and state their titles and their roles. But this is a huge missed opportunity. If you have everyone introduce themselves on the kickoff call, you're going to get an opportunity to often learn something by the way they introduce themselves, the role, how they explain what they're responsible for. So it's a big learning opportunity for you and your customers. It also helps to open up the tone of the kickoff call for collaboration and conversation. You're also going to want to start with an overview of what you've learned from sales. So before you ask your questions anything, I recommend giving an overview of what you've learned as far as their business goes and what their objectives are. This will help establish trust, credibility, and put you more in that trusted advisor role. Also walk through what the onboarding journey is going to look like. And there's also some examples of this in the download that I've referenced a few times, and that will be available. But you'll want to give your customers a visual and give them a step-by-step view of the path that they're about to go down. When your customers have clarity on their onboarding progress and they can actually see in their mind's eye the path that they're about to go down and how they're going to achieve the value and the goals, that will put their mind at ease, and it will help them to understand that you have a path laid out for them. You're the expert, you're the trusted advisor. They now have to take your guidance and go down this path with you. Explain the roles of everyone involved and tell customers what to expect. I recommend explaining the roles a little further into the call. So maybe as you're going through what the onboarding journey is and what your role is as a CSM is, and if you have professional services, what their role is, wait until everyone's kind of warmed up and into the call a little bit so you can start to establish expectations and explain what's involved in everybody's roles and outline who is accountable for tasks and actions. So once you've gone through what the customer journey is, look at what the tasks and actions are by all involved and confirm who is responsible for each task and action and organize next steps. The RACI model is also really effective here as well because you'll want to make sure that the customers are also very clear on what they need to do and the deliverables that they have during onboarding. So lastly, this is an opportunity to teach your customers about business outcomes. So as I mentioned before, I was going to show you an example of a slide that I often use during kickoff calls. So here you'll see that there's 4 business goals and objectives. The 2 that are circled are examples or hypotheticals of what customers would have shared to the sales team and through the sales cycle as to what their goals are. The other 2 that aren't circled are examples of business objectives and business impact and outcomes that your customers will also experience by adopting your product and your solution and going through this journey with you. Now, this isn't about talking about features and functionality of your tool and your product with your customers. This is showing them how working with you, how using the solution is going to impact their business. This is a really great opportunity to start teaching them something. And then again, they will start seeing you as an expert, a trusted advisor, and even a strategic partner. So last but not least, don't lose momentum after the call. So all of this hard work has been put into perfecting the sales to CS handoff, creating kickoff call templates, and doing the kickoff call. And this last step is extremely important as well. You're almost at the finish line, but you're not quite there yet until you follow up with the customer and immediately after the call if possible, but if not, make sure it's within 1 business day and send them the deck. Add notes to the deck in terms of who's responsible for what next steps you established, and who is responsible for each task and action, and send it to the customer so everyone is clear and you have that as really the start of your project plan. I found this really effective when I was a CSM and a CS leader. It just helped to keep customers motivated, not lose momentum, and it was crystal clear to everybody about what was involved. So I know I threw a lot of information out at everyone with the sales to CS handoff guidelines and the kickoff call. But as I mentioned, there are some links to the sales to CS guide and a link to a kickoff call template. And because there's so much content that's been developed over the course of talking and doing presentations and writing content about the sales to CS handoff, I am going to create an ebook and consolidate all of this content into one document, and I will send that out to anybody who is interested. So you just have to sign up to my email list, and I will send that out to everyone so you can kind of get all of this information in one place. So on that note, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Here's the first question. Where do they sign up? You mentioned the email list.
Yes.
Is it WnTD?
Yes, WnTDpartners.com.
Yeah, there's 5 questions that have been submitted down here.
Okay.
Actually, it looks like 6.
Oh,
and
great questions.
There's also a couple in the chat as well. So we got about 10 minutes.
10 minutes? Okay. So let's see how many we can get through in 10 minutes. So first one, how long should the kickoff call be? Great question. I would say the kickoff call should be within 30 to 60 minutes. Depending on how complex the onboarding process is and how many people are involved, it could be up to an hour. I wouldn't recommend it being over an hour, but also 30 minutes. Anything under 30 minutes might not provide enough value. So I think that's kind of the sweet spot. All right. Do you recommend CSMs join sales reps on the sales call ever? That's a good question as well. I think that at times that is appropriate. This is one of those things that it's not necessarily a blanket answer for all organizations and what's appropriate for all customer bases. But in my experience, again, as a CSM and a CS leader, there were times when, implementations were more complex, or there was some questions that the sales team, some pretty in-depth questions on the product that the sales team needed some help with in terms of implementation and, time to value, that sort of thing, where it was appropriate. So you kind of have to look at what's appropriate for your customer base. But yes, there are some times that it is the right thing to do. Ryan asks, how important do you feel it is to include sales on the kickoff call? Would you recommend any other internal members? This is a great question too. So many great questions. So
that's a great audience.
I know, that's true.
only the best.
That is true. So I'm glad you asked this, because if it's if your customer base is high frequency one-to-one contact, and if it was a lengthy sales cycle where there was, multiple conversations between the sales rep and the customer, I absolutely recommend that the sales team member joins the kickoff call, even if it's just for the first 10 to 15 minutes to do a warm handover, because that can really set the tone. It really makes the customer feel that they've entered into a relationship with a team. So I would recommend that as well. As far as other internal members, if professional services is involved, I would recommend them joining as well. And I would also say that if it's a really complex implementation and there's a lot of technical requirements, sometimes you might need an engineer, like a sales engineer, so think about, go back to that desired customer engagement framework and look at what's going to get your customer to that first point of value and achieving that first time to value as quickly as possible. And if that means getting, a couple of internal team members, then yes, have them join. All right. Their questions are flying in.
Maybe you should scroll up.
Yeah.
Some of the earlier ones, it's possible you may have covered the content already, but.
All right. So we've received buy-in from executive leadership for a tighter handoff process. What recommendation do you have to increase adoption of the process with the sales team? What I recommend with adoption from the sales team is having the CS leader and the sales manager kind of collaborate and talk about the challenges that both team members face and work on a process that's, mutually agreeable. So you want to make sure that it's first and foremost going to help the customers with their onboarding, but you want to make sure that it's not going to take too much time from the sales point of view or the CS team's point of view. So come to kind of a mutual conclusion as to what's going to work for both teams. And if you're coming at it from a sales and a CS perspective, you're going to come up with the optimal customer experience, getting those two point of views in place. And then from there, start distilling it down to the CSMs and the sales executives as well, and get feedback from your team members, and start socializing it, and do a training session. We did at one organization I was at, we did a kickoff, an internal kickoff when we implemented the sales to CS process, and that got people excited, gave everybody a chance to ask questions, and then from there it was a much smoother process. And I see another question here. 1 business day of signing up with the software. So I guess that's in relation to my golden rule of 1. Yes, within 1 business day of signing up with the software. It's really important. How would you handle an onboarding process where the customer is asked to provide information and also adoption onboarding resources? where the customer is asked to provide information and also needs adoption onboarding resources. So I would say, again, going back to the customer journey and what the appropriate customer engagement framework is for them. I guess I need a little bit more clarity on what that situation is, where they need to provide information and also needs adoption and onboarding resources. If whoever answered or asked that question is comfortable enough to email me and kind of dive into that a little bit further, I'd be happy to take that offline to get more clarity around that. How are we doing for time here?
We can
go for a few more? Sure.
Why don't I just add, just for the folks online, Elizabeth has been too humble to share, but she's been working in customer success for almost 10 years now at a number of different companies, including large companies like Salesforce.com, and she's also she's founded a customer success consultancy that's a WnTD partner. So some of these questions, or if you're looking for some more hands-on instructions, you can definitely reach out to her. And she's also launched a, well, why don't you talk about the masterclass too?
Yes. So I've launched a customer success masterclass training program and CS training certification. So there's three levels to the workshop, and there's online courses as well as live in-person training that I do, and it's centered around customer success methodology that I've created and that I've used for, I guess, years now, that I want to share with other CS professionals. And really what it is it's taking CS and looking at both strategies and tactics and frameworks that you can take and apply to your business and apply to your role in CS, and to give kind of a foundational framework that you can use to improve your customer experience and to increase kind of your professional development. So that's kind of the 100,000-foot overview of it, but there's more information on that on my website as well. So,
do you want to tackle any more, or is that?
Yeah, let's do one more, because I think then that'll take us to the top of the hour.
People are starting to drop off. So.
Our product is deeply technical and has a wide range of features and applications. We can't effectively teach a customer how to use the software in 30 to 60 minutes. What should we aim to accomplish during a kickoff meeting? What I would aim to accomplish that is setting expectations and giving an overview of what to expect, how long to expect the onboarding process to be, what are all the steps. So whether it's account configuration, gathering data, explaining to customers exactly what you need from them, what they can expect from you, and really kind of, giving an overview of what their onboarding process is going to look like, and that will set the tone for the rest of the onboarding. So,
if you don't mind me to add, I see there's definitely a distinction between the kickoff and a training session.
Yes.
Because what this individual seems to refer to is more of a product training, and generally that would not happen at the kickoff. In fact, that might, depending on the complexity of the implementation involved, that could be weeks or months later.
Yes.
So.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the kickoff call isn't meant to be a training call. It's meant to do introductions, to inform customers of what to expect in terms of onboarding and getting to the first time to value and their goals. And then that leads into the next step is often a training call after that.
All right. Great. Well, there's been tons of great comments from everyone. They seem to really enjoy the